Welcome back to the Birdhouse Dynasty Show and our third episode in our Moneyball series. And man, this introduction, it's so good. I didn't try and use music this time, and now I'm right with you back in the Birdhouse Dynasty Show. Thanks for joining us tonight. Again, this is our final episode of the Moneyball series. For those of you who tuned in for the first and second episodes, first episode was ADV or artificial dynasty value. Second episode was on waivers and how to use waivers to manipulate your value of your dynasty roster. And we did both of those episodes first in order to lead up to this third part of the Moneyball series, trading. And trading is probably easily the most fun part of playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. It's what keeps us interested and entertained these 8 months out of the year, from January all the way through August, and why we are so deeply involved in this hobby and why we love it. At least one of the main reasons I love it. So let's get right to it and rehash. First of all, ADV is artificial dynasty value. We explained how certain players' values are higher than what they probably should be, and certain players' values are lower than what they should be. Then we went into waivers and how you can pick them up based on your league's roster requirements and starting requirements, or if it's best ball, what waivers you should target so that you can extract value free from the waivers, which means you're getting them for nothing. And now, how do we implement both of those into trading? So, trading is super fun if you get some trades done, not so much fun if you're struggling getting them done. So, I'm going to try and help you, first of all, get some trades completed, and then how you use those trades to move into the next trade and the trade after that. So you understand how we're playing chess, not checkers here. A lot of people get so wound up in a trade and whether they won that particular one trade or not, and they want immediate gratification right away. But let's think about it here. We're in the middle of January, right? And you don't have to set any lineups, at least I don't, for about 8 months, 8.5 months here. So the trade you make today or yesterday, you could have, say you get 4 assets in the deal, right? 3 of those assets could be gone by March or April, right? And so what it means is any assets you're acquiring now, you should be looking forward as to how you're going to use those assets. If you move up from the 206 to the 110, are you moving up to actually make that selection at the 110, or are you moving up so that you can then move up from the 110 to the 105 or 104, right? Because it's a hell of a lot harder to move from the 206 to the 104 than it is to move from the 110 to the 104, right? So I'm going to show you a couple of examples that I did in my leagues, and then maybe you can use those to help you get those trades completed and play chess, not checkers, right? So I want you to think back to the movie Moneyball, and because this is where this whole thought process came from. And you remember again where Brad Pitt, Billy Bean, he was cleaning house and he got rid of Jeremy Giambi, but as part of that cleaning house process, he went ahead and acquired Ricardo Rincon. And as part of that deal, he had to send somebody down to the minors, or he had to get rid of somebody, right? But before that, he did something in particular, and I don't know if they quite mentioned it in the movie or not, but looking back on the actual facts of what happened there. So remember at the beginning of the movie, Billy Beane really wanted Ricardo Rincon from the Indians, right? And he wasn't able to get it done because Jonah Hill was kind of saying, this was before he was part of the A's, before Billy Beane stole him from the Indians. But to make a long story short, what Billy Beane did, rather than go right after Ricardo Rincon at his asking price, because there were 2 or 3 other teams interested in him at the time, he knew that because that's what the Indians GM gave him, that information. So he used that information and then sold a left-handed reliever to one of those 3 teams that wanted Rincon. Thus, what it did was lower the asking price for Rincon because one of those 3 teams was no longer in the running. So then there were only 2 teams, the A's and the Giants, that were looking to acquire a left-handed reliever. So this is something you could use, say, if you're looking, somebody throws a top-end tight end up on the block, right? They throw, I don't know, they throw Brock Bowers out there, okay? And you are sitting on TJ Hawkinson and Dallas Goedert, okay? And you want to try and acquire Brock Bowers, and it's the middle of the season, and Bowers is hot, right? Hawk is just coming back from his injury. Goddard's doing all right. But the Bowers owner doesn't want really either of those guys. Now, he does tell you, look, the asking price is going to be pretty high for Bowers. I mean, there's a couple other guys interested too. And you go ahead and look at your league, and you look at your competition, and you know that there's 4 contenders, right? And you can kind of see one guy has Kyle Pitts as his starting tight end, and that could be possibly be the guy who's interested in him because Kyle Pitts is really pissing him off. And so you go ahead and offer Dallas Goedert for a 2nd and a 4th to that owner, right? And that owner has Jalen Hurts, and he's like, I'll do that. Goddard's doing better than Pitts. I don't have to shell out 3 firsts for Brock Bowers now. So that trade gets passed through and is on the the message board, and everybody sees that. And so now what happens, the Bowers owner is like, oh shit, that was one guy that I was hoping to trade him to. Now he's probably willing to take a little bit less if he's rebuilding in a major 2-year rebuild. So Bowers isn't necessarily somebody that he sees. I mean, obviously anybody could use Bowers, right? But he sees it more as an asset that's gaining points and going against his max points for, right? And maybe he's got some other decent young tight end. Maybe he has Laporta too, right? So anyway, point being that he still wants to get rid of Bowers because he's the most valuable asset on his roster, and he knows he can split Bowers into 2 or 3 things. But now he's more willing to take maybe 2 firsts instead of 3 firsts, right? Or 2 firsts and a 2nd is what he wanted, and now it's only 2 firsts. Okay, so that's one way you can do it, and that's what Billy Beane did, and he ended up getting the guy he wanted, which was Ricardo Rincon. And he even, if you remember, threw in his own cash, but said, hey, when we sell him for more next year, I get to take that extra money on top, right? So anyway, just one of the fun things and involved in that trade there from Moneyball. So what I want to get at is I want to talk about how you trade those waiver claims that you made for free profit, how you try to avoid the sunken cost fallacy in some of your maybe poor draft picks or a draft pick that wasn't poor, but you took him where he was supposed to be, but now he's not performing as well. And so now you're kind of stuck with that asset, but not necessarily if you're willing to trade him for less than what you acquired him for, and then get back into it all and bring all three things together at the end. So first of all, those assets, if you, especially in the case of rebuilding, but even when you're competing, you get those pickups off of waivers, right? And you specifically look again at your roster construction, your roster limits and requirements for your teams in your league, and then your starting lineup. So let's say it's a 12-team start 10 league and a super flex tight end premium, 1.5 only in the tight end premium. I've got a league where this was 4 or 5 years ago, first year. And I remember I picked up Jared Cook. Okay. Now Jared Cook was an older tight end, but he had just had a great season with the Packers. And now I believe he was with the Saints. And so I picked him up off waivers, and I knew that the league was just getting into this idea of the tight end premium. So a tight end getting a 0.5 point extra per catch seemed like a lot to everybody right now. For most of you who've played in maybe in tight end premiums for a few years now, you know that a 0.5 point tight end premium isn't that big of a deal. It's more so when you have a 0.75 or a full point extra for the tight ends catches is when the value really means something. So anyway, I had Jared Cook and I offered him to somebody for a 3rd rounder, right? Or he asked me, he's like, would you take a 3rd rounder? And I said, I think so. If you throw in a 4th though, I'll do it for sure right away. I won't entertain somebody else's offer. And so he went ahead and took it for a 3rd and a 4th. And that was something that I got just for free for getting rid of somebody who I was doing. It was a first year and in the league. And so I was doing kind of a first year punt. It was a house money season. I was just trying to acquire draft picks. So that worked out well for me. He got Jared Cook, who he probably played a few games. And I mean, for a 3rd, 4th rounder, probably ended up on the good side of that for him as well. So it was a win-win trade. I'm not saying that to brag that I pulled one over on him. I'm just saying for my purposes, I got something for nothing but fab. Okay. Now, depending on your league, like if you're in a guillotine league, fab is a different story. But in most of our dynasty leagues, you're willing to throw in fab pretty easily, right? Unless somebody drops somebody that shouldn't be on waivers, nobody's going to be out there trading for fab. So another example, if you remember back when Aaron Rodgers was in the middle of his most recent near MVP or MVP season, I can't remember if he actually won it. I don't think he did, but 2-3 years ago back in Green Bay, his second to last season there, he was tearing it up, right? And Jordan Love had just been picked. I think Love was in his 2nd year there, and things weren't looking so good for Jordan because Rodgers was now playing like his back in his MVP form. And so somebody in my league actually dropped Jordan Love. Now, this league had only maybe 26 for the rosters. Now, we still had taxi, whatever. Point being, Jordan Love shouldn't have been dropped, okay? He should have at least tried to trade him to somebody. But the guy, for whatever reason, dropped him. And now everybody at that time in the league didn't see Jordan Love as something huge because Rodgers was looking like he was going to play 2 or 3 more years. And Jordan Love was going to end up like Trey Lance basically right now. But even Trey Lance has a little value, although there are leagues I'm in where Trey Lance is on waivers. Now, I am doing everything possible to try and get somebody like Trey Lance onto my roster for situations like this. Because Jordan Love did end up getting the job. We all know that now after Rodgers tanked his last year in Green Bay and ended up going to New York. Jordan Love ended up being something, right? And so this deal that I had, I'm not going to waste time trying to find it for you. Basically, I ended up trading Jordan Love and Jahmyr Gibbs. This was before this season. So Jordan Love's value was on the rise this last offseason. So I traded Jordan Love and Jahmyr Gibbs for CeeDee Lamb, Russell Wilson, and a first. So now there was a couple of other ancillary pieces involved in there too, but nothing extraordinary of value. The only reason I mentioned Russell Wilson is because Russell Wilson at least was a starting quarterback, okay? I was giving up Jordan Love, who was my second quarterback. I had Lamar Jackson. I had a pretty set line, pretty good lineup, ready to go, ready to win. I was coming out of a 2-year rebuild, and so I was getting ready to win here, or start contending at least, the hope was. And so to trade Jahmyr Gibbs was something, a little scary, but I knew if I was going to go after CeeDee Lamb, and that's what I was trying to do to slim down my wide receivers. If I was going to go out and acquire somebody like CeeDee Lamb, I have to give up something. And so by offering Jordan Love, who was hot last offseason, offering Jordan Love and Jahmyr Gibbs, I was able to get something like CeeDee Lamb. I also got Russell Wilson in return, he's important because he at least was going to be somewhat viable. I figured he would start a few games for me this year. I knew Justin Fields was there, but I knew that the narrative on Russell Wilson was terrible. However, I also knew that somebody like Mike Tomlin was going to eventually start Russell Wilson at some point. And so, because I had Matthew Stafford and Daniel Jones as well as options as my second quarterback. So now I was adding a third guy into that mix. So I was kind of having Lamar Jackson and then 3 guys who could fill in at any point in the season as my quarterback 2. So rather than going 2 QBs strong, I had 1 strong one and then 3 guys to try and mix up. And I would just play the season and see how things went. But I was adding that stud wide receiver that I knew I could trust for a few seasons in CeeDee Lamb versus having Jahmyr Gibbs. Okay. And as we can see how the year played out, I think it worked out in my favor because that first rounder that I got ended up being Brock Bowers. So, I ended up getting CeeDee, Brock Bowers, and Russell Wilson for Jahmyr Gibbs and Jordan Love. So I think things worked out all right. Now, obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs looked pretty good this year, and Jordan Love is still the starting quarterback for the Packers. And yes, he was down this year, but he's going to very likely play a lot more years than Russell Wilson. Just the benefit for me is that I ended up getting Brock Bowers. So that's one example of how I was able to flip Jordan Love. Now, it was very easy for me to flip Jordan Love because I had acquired him for free. Now, this is part of the sunken cost fallacy in that I was in another league where somebody put Dak Prescott on the block in the middle of this season. Okay. And this guy fell prey to the sunken cost fallacy because last season, before the season started, but right after the startup, he acquired Dak Prescott for 2 firsts. All right. So when he put him up on the block this year now, he put him out there and I offered some random first for him. Okay. Dak was still healthy at this time. So I was looking at him like somebody, actually, no, this was right after Dak got hurt and I'm rebuilding in this league. So I offered a first for Dak and he came back to me in the DMs and said, look, cost me 2 firsts for Dak. So I'm looking for at least that. Now we all know pretty much that in Superflex leagues, depending on the market, Dak is probably not worth 2 firsts at this time. He's worth a first, maybe plus something, depending on that first. If it's the 105, let's say, that's about maybe where he's at, but you could probably get up to the 102 for him. I don't know, somewhere in the first round. It's up to you to decide on where Dak is. I see him as somebody I like to have because he likes to throw, and but we don't know who the coordinator is going to be for them this coming year. With McCarthy there, though, I was trusting that they'd be throwing, and he's got CeeDee Lamb, so he's going to at least be throwing to CeeDee, right? Anyway, the point being is this guy puts Dak Prescott out on the block, but then he's demanding something that's unrealistic. He's demanding something like he wants in return everything that he spent on him. So basically he got the year and a half out of Dak for free. Okay. And okay, if Dak was playing very well, then you could get 2 firsts for him. But Dak wasn't even playing. He was hurt. Okay. But this guy was falling prey to the sunken cost fallacy, believing that he should get at least exactly what he paid for him. Now, I mean, you could do that if it's a younger player, right? I mean, like say Jordan Love, who wasn't playing great this year, and you had paid a first for him 2 years ago, right? But I mean, the whole point is that it doesn't matter right now what you paid for somebody 6 months ago, because every player's value has changed since June or July, right? Some players not so much as others. Like there's a lot of wide receivers in the 10 to 40 range, right, that are still in the 10 to 40 range where they're a late first or second round value, right? And then at running back, there's a lot of running backs who are similar, right? Like, has James Conner's value changed any? No, he got a year older, but he still performed, and he's very likely to be their starting running back again next year, even though Trey Benson is there. Trey Benson didn't do a whole lot, so it looks like it's James Conner's backfield again. So the point being is that he's somebody whose values still remain pretty steady. But with the guys whose values have obviously changed, you can't expect to just get in return what you paid for them initially, okay? But when you're trading, you want to try to exploit that, okay? So what I'm getting at is there's an example of a trade I made in the bottom line league where I was trying to get to Dak Prescott, and this was before last season. But all I had was Patrick Mahomes and straight up garbage as my second quarterback. I had like these backup quarterbacks. Trying to think. We were rebuilding that first year, and then we were going into looking to compete. And our options were to use our late first on a quarterback or to go out and acquire a veteran quarterback. But in order to get to Dak level, Dak was valued somewhere around, I don't know, the 8th to 10th best quarterback at the time. We needed to at least have some kind of starting quarterback to offer this guy. So we went out and spent I believe it was the 109, and I think that's the pick we had. We spent the 109 to acquire Derek Carr, which might have been a little bit of an overpay, but this is a league where they value the quarterbacks. So Derek Carr, he had just signed in New Orleans at this time, and there was some excitement. It was coming up on the beginning of the season. So we gave up. It wasn't the 109. It was the future first. Yes. So we gave up that pick in order to acquire Derek Carr. All right. Then we took Derek Carr in a second, and we were able to get up to Dak Prescott. Now we threw in some wide receiver as well, and then we got like a third back or something. I can't remember the exact, but the whole point of it is that we used pick to get something that somebody else wanted, right? That we knew was going to be enticing enough. Like if we just were trying to throw picks at somebody to get Dak Prescott, that wasn't going to work. The guy still needed a quarterback back. And so that's what you have to, in these super flex and 2 quarterback leagues, you have to understand when you're trying to acquire quarterbacks here, you can't just throw 3 firsts at, Jaden Daniels and expect the guy to be, oh yeah, that's fine. No, he's going to most likely want a quarterback, like at least a middling quarterback, like, at least if you're throwing a first and a second and Baker Mayfield at him, right? You don't know what the guy's opinion is on Baker, right? Or you could throw Jared Goff and 2 firsts at him, okay? Or a high first this year, like one of the first 3 picks in Jared Goff for Jaden Daniels, right? You throw that at him, then at least you got a base to start with. Maybe he'll be overjoyed by getting the 103. Maybe your league values those high-end picks a little bit more than others, and you know that when it comes on the clock, you're going to be able to flip that for something else. Or you just want a stud running back this year, or Ted McMillan, whatever. But the point being that you need to acquire assets that people are going to like in order to trade. It's much easier when you're trading something that people want. You have to be willing to give a little so you can get what you really want in the end. And can't emphasize that enough. When it comes to trading, you have to look at your league, bring up Dynasty Daddy. Dynasty Daddy gives you it's the best free site for showing strengths and weaknesses at certain positions to help you find a trade partner. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Because if you're loaded at wide receiver, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try and throw a really good receiver at another team who's top 3 at wide receiver already and expect them to give you one of their best running backs. It'd make a lot more sense to go at the team that has 4 or 5 good running backs, but is a little weaker at wide receiver. Okay. That's how I was able to get CeeDee Lamb in that deal. The guy had a lot of good talent at wide receiver. So CeeDee was kind of expendable for him. I'm sure he hurt a little to trade CeeDee Lamb, but at the same time, he was good at wide receiver, but had no true number 1 at running back. And Jahmyr Gibbs was big in that deal, but Jordan Love was the real kicker that made it happen. And so that's where I'm getting at. Be flexible, be willing to make a deal, to make another deal. Don't look at one deal as the end all be all. All right. When you're acquiring picks, think about it in ways other than, oh, I'm acquiring this pick and now I got to pick a running back here. Now I got to pick a quarterback here. No, think about it in different ways. See how you can maneuver those picks. And that's where the fun really begins. And that's where you learn how to manipulate the value in your leagues. Use that artificial draft value. Use those waivers that you picked up for free, make them actually worth something. Make those backup quarterbacks worthwhile. As soon as they have any kind of mention in the news or whatever, get them on the block, get a 3rd or 4th for them, make it profitable for you. Okay. Or if you're weak at the quarterback position, maybe you have to get 1 spot start out of them. If you get 1 spot start out of them, it's all worthwhile. All right. So please leave a like and subscribe. Any questions, you can throw them right in the chat or comments below. Don't be afraid to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Birdhouse Dynasty Show with any of your questions. But just please help try to support the channel. Let us know how we're doing here. We're going to be back probably tomorrow, yes, with some trades that happened in my leagues and let you know what's going on out there, get an idea of the values that's going on. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoyed this Moneyball series. Have a great night, and don't forget, never stop working.